Hello everybody, it's Chris Payton here, yours truly. I've just come on to discuss the next Pharos course that I'm going to be teaching from November the 13th, which is called Scotland 1750 to 1850 Beyond the OPRs. Beyond the OPRs. What are the OPRs? OPRs are the old parish records, or the old parochial registers, and basically what this course is there for is beyond the basics. Whenever you start your family history research, you tend to start with things such as the vital records, births, marriages and deaths, and you'll do that within the statutory records recorded by the state from 1855 onwards, and then prior to that, the OPRs, or the CPRs if your ancestors were Roman Catholic. But the point of this course is to then go beyond those records and other things such as censuses and so on, and to look at some slightly more interesting records that can add considerable flesh to the bones of your family tree. They can also help to break brick walls in certain circumstances when the parish records fail. So this course, it's 5 weeks long, and there are 5 main topics basically that are covered in that period. The first lesson will look at the records of the Kirk Session and the parish poor. Now the Kirk Session, I suppose in official terminology, the Kirk Session are the church courts comprised of several elders and the minister and the clerk and all the rest of it, and they provided church discipline to the parish flock. Now that's the official kind of definition, I suppose. The reality of the Kirk Session records in a lot of cases is they are full of juicy gossip. All sorts of scandals involving family members and ancestors and the friends of ancestors and so on. One of the things you'll often come across within the Kirk Session records are cases of what was known as antenuptial fornication. And in a nutshell, that was doing the dirty deed before you got married. So the church didn't like that for some reason, but they ended up hauling people in front of the Kirk Session and giving them a right telling off, but during the process kept extraordinarily detailed records in many cases of the investigation, so witness interviews and all sorts. So as well as being records of the church discipline, they were, in a nutshell, the equivalent of the early tabloids, the newspapers, because they were full of all sorts of gossip. Ministers were obviously quite bored at times, so they had a lot to write down and read to keep them entertained, I think. But anyway, that's the Kirk Session records. They also record other things, people who worked on the Sabbath and they got told off for it, or if they got married irregularly, and other things, like if you took a loan from the Kirk Session, or the Kirk Session took a loan from you, that would be recorded, and various other things, payments and so on. So they're very detailed records that can add a lot of context to your ancestors' stories, beyond just the basic birth, marriage and death records. So the parish poor, again, the records of the parish poor, they were looked after by the Kirk up to 1845, at which point the state took over, and we look at sort of how the parish poor were administered to as well. Then in the second lesson we look at the borough records, and the boroughs were the forerunners to the modern towns of Scotland. So we look at various types of records that can help, that are associated with the boroughs. Things like the borough records themselves, you know, the town administration records, but also records of things such as trading corporations. You know, if your ancestors were weavers or tailors or butchers or bakers or whatever, who worked in a borough, well, there's lots of records from organisations that looked after their own and who were given exclusive privileges to trade within the boroughs. Boroughs, in a nutshell, were basically trading areas, and there were all sorts of types of boroughs, but they all did the same thing in a nutshell. So we look at that. Then in the third lesson, we look at the sort of various occupations and tax lists and all sorts of records that can help to also provide some extra flesh to the bones of your ancestors. We look at things like the various tax records that exist. There was all sorts of weird stuff going on in Scotland. They tax people for owning dogs, for having hearths, windows, farm horses and all sorts of stuff. So we look at a lot of that, and valuation records and so on. And then we get to the last two lessons, 4 and 5, which cover the area that I particularly have a lot of fun with quite a lot of the time. And that's to do with land records and inheritance. Now, again, just to put it in a nutshell, Scotland is a very different place to the rest of the United Kingdom when it comes to how land tenure was organised in Scotland. We'd feudalism and oodle tenure and all sorts of stuff that other people have never heard of before. So those two lessons will look at how land was transferred, the types of records that were generated as a consequence of that, including the very famous but very often badly pronounced Saisons. You'll often hear them pronounced as Sassines or Sazines or some other godforsaken term that's just not right. So I'll explain what that's all about. And then I also have a look at things such as how land was inherited. When you go on to Scotland's People, for example, there are wills and testaments online, but up until 1868 they only dealt with what was known as the movable assets, the stuff that couldn't be pinned down, like bed linen or your uncle's painting on the wall. But houses and land and all that kind of stuff had to be inherited in a very different way. And there's lots of wonderfully weird Scottish terminology that surrounds all of this, because it's all based on Scots law, which is very different to English law. And I can assure you that it is based on Scots law, and the words that you often come across are in Scots and not Klingon. But there's some wonderful things that you can find from these records. And in some cases you can trace property, in a few cases going back hundreds of years through these types of records. So some juicy stuff. The course is absolutely packed with stuff that you may not necessarily immediately think to consider, but which is actually the bread and butter of Scottish genealogy. So it's a lot of fun. Scottish Research Online, which is the previous course to this one, was very much an introductory course and looked at basic vital records, births, marriages, deaths, census records, newspapers, all of that, and specifically what could be found online. This course is definitely part 2. It's more advanced. You don't necessarily have to have done the original Scottish Research Online course if you have the same level of knowledge, but you will be expected to know what Scotland's People is and all that kind of stuff. So it is slightly more advanced than just the beginners kind of course. But it is, I think, probably a more juicy course. There's lots of really good stuff packed into it. Some of the stuff that I'll talk about can be consulted online. Some of the stuff can't be considered online. It has to be actually viewed in Scotland itself. But I'll talk about what exists online and what you can access there, or through other means, through family history centres, for example, through the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saint Family Search, all of that. And the stuff that's in Scotland, even if you can't immediately access it, the next time you're in Scotland, you'll certainly know what to target. Or you can hire a professional genealogist or whatever way you want to do it. So it's very much also about the context of the period, 1750 to 1850, as much as it is about going beyond the records of the OPRs and all of that. Now, the course itself is 5 weeks long. It costs £45.99, starts on November the 13th, and it's a typical Pharos course. So if you don't know what a Pharos course is, I would encourage you to go and look at the website, which is www.pharostutors.com, and Pharos is P-H-A-R-O-S, as in the Owl Lighthouse, the Pharos Lighthouse. So pharostutors.com. But in a nutshell, the course is essentially structured by me once a week sending out a lesson, which you will read during the week. At the end of that week, we will then have an online discussion about that, an online chat room discussion. There's also a dedicated forum that will exist throughout the run of the course, where you can provide answers to questions that are raised in the lessons, discuss your own sort of issues that you may have come across in your research based on the topics at hand, or any other issue you want to talk about. It's your forum for the 5 weeks when you take part in the course. So hopefully I'll see a few of you there. It is already quite a way subscribed, but there are still spaces on the course. There's always room for a little one. So hopefully I will see you soon, and very much look forward to it. Thanks very much.